You're watching the Autos 360 Network.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Rick Walker. You're watching SST Live, and I'm here tonight with Ryan Walker to talk about the ongoing automotive chip shortage and other pressures on the auto industry that we're seeing right now, leading to a variety of problems on the production side and the sales side. And of course, Ryan, you work at an automotive dealership. And of course, you're a regular contributor here on SST Live. And I mean, your job really is to buy cars, right? You're an automotive buyer, especially on the used side.
Yeah.
So we know we're getting an update right now on where things are at with this ongoing chip shortage, which is really dragged on now into a second year. And that's having a dramatic impact on automotive production. And we're seeing, I think, thousands of even Ford Broncos. Ford was saying that they're stockpiling Ford Broncos again this week in Michigan because they can't get the chips that they need to finish these things off and deliver them to customers. So before we get into too much of the nitty gritty on the production side, and we also want to talk about, I'm going to talk a little bit about the pressure on factories because we've seen border blockades in the past week or so, last few weeks, and we're maybe now even seeing the possibility of a trucker strike manifesting. So that could put additional pressure on the production side. What are you seeing on the dealership side right now? Have things improved at all since we last spoke about this? I think we last talked about it about a month ago.
Not particularly. Like in certain areas it has, and others it hasn't. When you're looking at certain cars, like if you're trying to get into something like a Kia or a Hyundai now, what used to be a little bit easier is a lot harder now. It's just becoming slimmer and slimmer options out there to get when you're going to pick your car without having a large wait time, especially if you go for a much higher trim package vehicle. That's why you're seeing a lot of the Broncos kind of sitting. It's they don't make as many of them as like an F-150 or something like that. So your Broncos typically go out with like a lot higher of a trim package. So those ones tend to be the ones that'll take a seat and wait in the back for a chip before, a more base model one were to come up, because once a base model one kind of rolls up on the dealership lot, it can sell instantly.
I see. So I guess the industry analysts are forecasting that they're expecting a gradual recovery in inventories, but probably not until at least the end of this year. And because of that, we've got low supply, high demand, and we're seeing, well, I mean, that's just fueling prices across the board, right? And I was surprised this week to speak to someone who has been, they kind of work for a Honda dealership. And they were saying that even Honda dealerships are having difficulty getting the inventory they need. And it's had a dramatic impact on their operations. Dealerships where they were maybe doing 20,000 units a year are down to maybe a couple of thousand is all the cars they can get for the entire year, it looks like.
Yeah, a lot of places are seeing large amounts of stock just not show up in comparison to what they were promised, especially if you talk about like more of a volume style dealership like a Honda or something like a Toyota, where just the overall amount of cars that they're going to be able to sell with somebody in a year is much less now, because they have to be very picky about how many they actually produce in order to have enough cars for enough chips and not just have a bunch of shells sitting around that aren't going to be able to do anything until these chips show up next year, when they're going to, have a new body style out by then, or a new trim or something.
And I guess this all started like back in 2020. This problem started back in 2020 when the COVID pandemic first hit, and then automakers are trying to figure out what they were going to have to do. It was difficult for them to plan. They were getting reduced or canceled orders. And so then they started to cancel orders for semiconductor chips because they thought demand for vehicles would fall. But as it turned out, nothing has really worked out the way that they thought it would. And as things played out, with all of the government money that's been dumped into the economy and people getting that and not spending it on things like travel, I guess demand has remained fairly high for new vehicles. So it looks like in most cases, every new unit that's produced already has a buyer.
Yeah, largely. It's very rare that you'll see a car just kind of sitting on the lot. The only time you'll usually see that is if it's you get a weird spec'd out car shipped over to you. Like I know at my dealership, we had the Jaguar I-Pace that came in, and just because of the color combination of the interior and exterior, it was a bit of an oddball car, so no one had already purchased it. But even within of it being on the lot for a few days, it was gone, just because at that point, the person who bought it was just going to take what they could get. So look, if it's on a lot, it's pretty much already sold, especially if you're looking at a higher demand vehicle.
So what's your advice to someone who's in the market to buy a new vehicle? What's the strategy they should use when they go in to look at a car? How do they make sure that they get the best value, the best bang for their buck in this kind of environment? Because it seems like it's more of a seller's market rather than a buyer's market.
Largely, you'll if you're going to go and try and buy a brand new car today, you're going to be stuck paying the price that the vehicle is. It's very unlikely that you'll get any sort of discounts towards most vehicles, as you know, just because there's somebody else right behind you who also wants to buy that car and is going to be willing to do that, so you have to be as well. The only way you'll see yourself getting any sort of discounts on cars is if you're buying some sort of stock that's been an aged unit. So you don't see that with new. You might see that with some used stuff where there may have been something that's just, it's out of season, or it's just something that just hasn't sold because of the area at that time. That's the only time you'll ever really see any discounts happening. The best thing you can do is try and find a dealership that's not going to have any markup on the deal on the vehicle or any sort of premiums. Unless it's something brand wide, like with Land Rover and Jaguar, it's a brand wide thing where there's premiums on top of some of our more higher end vehicles. Like if you wanted to buy a Range Rover Defender, there's a premium you have to pay on top of the standard price already now to get that car. But I know with some dealerships, I think it was Ford specifically, Ford isn't telling anybody to put premiums on the trucks or anything, but some people are, other dealerships aren't. So the best to figure out where it is that isn't going to, and then the best thing you can do realistically is wait. If you try and buy something off the lot, you're probably going to pay over sticker for it no matter what. So if you are okay with waiting a few months for your vehicle, you might as well get exactly what you want and take the time to wait rather than just settle for something you can have, a week from now.
The strange situation that evolved out of all of this is I know some dealers, I think most dealers initially, where we're facing a situation where there really wasn't a downside to this at first, because even though it was actually an advantage in some ways, because now it was a seller's market. So every unit they were getting in, they were basically getting market value for it without needing to discount anything. So they were getting pretty much full margin. Plus, they didn't have to do as much volume to do to make as much money because they were making full pop on every unit. And they didn't have to invest as much money because they didn't need to buy as much inventory. So they didn't have to outlay as much cash, which reduced the cost of their capital investment. So it wasn't so bad for a while, maybe for the first year or so. But as this has dragged on, that scenario really is not sustainable, is it? I mean, they need new cars to keep a new car dealership going at some point.
Yeah, A used car dealership just strictly runs off the fact that it's always got new inventory coming in. It's always going to be there's going to be a car for somebody. Working in like a more of a new car dealership atmosphere, leasing is a huge thing that keeps them going. Just repeat customers coming in every 2-3 years to come and get a new vehicle. Without any brand new cars, you lose a lot of those customers as their leases will come up and there will be no vehicle for them to hop into, or it ends up being too expensive at this point for them to get into a lease because they can't get a little bit better of a deal in comparison, and they'll end up switching brands. I know that like a lot of Jaguar customers have had to switch over to maybe a different brand that had an SUV or a car comparable to what we offered, just because they couldn't get what they wanted within a timely manner.
Now we've seen, Now we've seen in the last few weeks disruptions at border points because of protests over pandemic mandates in Canada, and that was, at the Ambassador Bridge alone in Windsor, where you've got Windsor crossing over into Detroit, the automotive capital, right?
Mm-hmm.
That bridge does $300 million worth of trade U.S. every day.
Mm-hmm.
And that resulted in some shutdowns at factories on both sides of the border. And I guess there must be some concern even among dealers that that's going to even further exacerbate the problem until the auto factories can kind of make up that production, right?
Dependent. Like, I'm not sure of which factories have gotten shut down or anything like that, so I'm not sure which brands specifically are affected. But I mean, obviously, if there's no trade going back and forth and there's no, parts showing up to dealerships and everything, obviously everything will slow down and it'll be a little bit harder to get anything done.
Well, I know that in Oakville and Windsor, there was reduced capacity. Toyota had to shut down in Ontario for at least a few days, I believe. GM had canceled some shifts at a factory in Lansing. So, I mean, it was having some impacts on those factories, but I would imagine they're back up and running now because those border disruptions have been pretty much, taken care of. But I guess there's just still ongoing concern. How are the dealerships coping with all of that? I think that your dealership, for instance, and you're buying more used inventory, right, to try to compensate?
Largely, yeah. You'll see that at most dealerships now. More dealerships are even starting to kind of get behind the same, in the same boat as what we are, where we have, like, our dealership has somebody like me and then one of my coworkers who all we do strictly is go online to try and buy used vehicles, whether it be through something like Kijiji or Facebook, and we just spend all day trying to buy cars. Other dealerships now are starting to kind of hop on that and hire people to do the same job as I am. Just trying to keep their used market open, because that's the only market that's really out there right now. If you have a dealership that can't get you can't get a truck in, you might as well try and take advantage of the used market while you can.
So if you have all these dealers competing to buy used inventory, used cars through places like, where normally just consumers would go, because dealers traditionally go through auctions and they get lease backs and trade-ins, right? That's where their inventory would normally come from. So for dealerships to be going out and trying to buy up inventory just on the market from private sellers, that's a fairly new thing, right? That's not something normally you would see. So what's that doing to the market in terms of pricing? Are we seeing, how much are prices up?
Quite a bit, depending on what you have. Obviously, everything's affected by inflation right now. So any car that you own is now worth more than it was, and usually by a substantial amount, within the 5 to 10% or something along the lines of that.
I've heard in some cases used cars being worth as much as 40% more, depending on what it is.
Yeah, if you're looking at something that's in very high demand, there's a low amount of them available, for sure. Things like some of your newer Lexuses that are coming off of lease, same thing with some Toyotas and Hondas. They're selling for a lot of money. Even looking at Honda Civics, if you even look at the auction market that dealerships would usually go out and purchase from, they are selling for close to full retail just on the auction, let alone when people post them online for private sale, where, you know, they've been told all day on CNN or ABC or CBC or whatever news source telling them that their car is worth $5,000 to $10,000 more than what it was posted online. So that'll obviously just drive the price up as more and more people kind of take that into consideration and whatnot. So a lot of the pricing that I see is very like online, you'll see is very unrealistic. When you actually look back and see what somebody's charging, like a regular person charging for a vehicle versus a dealership that'll give you financing and warranty and everything under the sun, and then the private person who's offering you none of that stuff will try and get an extra $5,000 to $10,000 out of you for the exact same car with a taillights warranty. So when they see the taillights go away, it's not their problem anymore.
So some of these reports that we're seeing through the mainstream media about this issue, and when they're talking about pricing, some of that might be a little bit of clickbait, maybe a little sensationalistic and not very realistic when it comes to the impression or the ideas that they're implanting in people's heads with regard to how much their particular vehicle might be worth.
They're generalizing it too much. They're just looking at the highest numbers possible and throwing those right in your face. No one actually really reads into an article too deep. Typically, conversations I have on day-to-day basis with people explaining things in a little more in depth is, you know, it changes their opinion on kind of what things are actually like. But no matter what I tell them, they're still going to think their car is worth $5,000 to $10,000 more, because that's the nice thing to hear about your car, not the not so fun thing. So it's too generalized. Certain cars are definitely worth a lot more money now. Like if you're talking about something that's a year or two old, that is typically a higher trim package where it's a lot harder to find one. If it's a very desirable color, like if you have a all-wheel drive long range model, Tesla Model Y, that's a high demand car. There's always going to be lots of them kind of ready and selling. Whereas something like a 2012 Kia Sedona with 180K on it, it's still worth what it is, including your new inflation, but that's about it. You're not going to be looking at, there's still about the exact same amount of 2012 Kia Sedonas out there as there was before.
Tesla, though, as I understand it, they're in a little bit better position when it comes to the chip situation, and so there's maybe more of them available. Is that accurate, or do you know?
Not particularly. Like their cars have always been kind of in this boat where you order it and it kind of shows up when it shows up. So they're able to kind of stick to their guns on things and have them still show up late. They're not really showing much of hurt through that same department for chips, as it already takes a long time for the car to get out. Obviously, certain models are having a harder time coming out or taking longer to show up and whatnot. Like if you get any of the Model S's, like if you try to get a Model S Plaid or something along the lines of that, I think you'll probably have a longer wait time than usual. But if you try and get, a Model 3 standard range or anything like that, it'll be quite a quick turnaround because they sell so many of them.
Is this current market fueling more interest in electric vehicles? Is that having any impact, or is it, are people still just kind of weighing the options as they normally would? Are they more inclined to buy an electric vehicle because of any of this stuff going on, or maybe more inclined to buy gasoline, or does it even make any difference?
Not particularly. When you're talking about electric cars, you're essentially only looking at higher end electric cars. Anything that's like an economy grade electric car or cheaper, most of them people don't buy. They don't sell very well. Unless you have a Tesla or something, even in like the Jaguar lineup with like an I-Pace or an E-Pace would be technically that one, or something like that. You're not seeing very many of them. Even when I worked at like a Honda dealership, we have full electric cars like the Clarity. It's like you'd see one come through a year. Tesla obviously has a large cult following, and a lot of people want them, and it's kind of a status symbol to people to have a Tesla, and they're becoming more affordable as they get a little bit older now. So you're seeing more and more people kind of driving them. Looking at like markets in comparison, if you're looking at like for a very basic like a Tesla Model 3, It's about there's about the same amount of those as Honda Civics now. When you're looking at the used car market, there's usually within about 200 kilometers of where I work, there's usually between 90 to 100 of them for sale. For just like for your standard range, like the standard range plus Model 3.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't have thought there would be that many.
Yeah, there's a large amount of them out there just in like your base model forms. So anytime you get something that's like a Tesla that's a little bit more of a higher end, it'll fetch a bit more of a premium, and they'll be out there a little bit longer. But you're also starting to see Teslas coming up really inexpensive because they're as old as 2016, I think, and if not older on them. So you're seeing a lot of them coming up, and their battery lives are a little bit lower. They don't maybe last quite as long. They could use a replacement at some point. There's a little more beat up, dings, dents, scratches, things like that. But it's a more affordable Tesla for somebody who wants to get into that.
Big D says, don't get stuck with one of them new flooded vehicles, people getting sick from black mold. That's not really an issue around here, is it, in the Ontario, Canada market?
Not particularly, nothing that I've heard of. It all depends on kind of where your car comes from. I know like BMW had a bunch of flooding like last year, but I don't think any of those cars would really ever get out of there. Anytime that there would be a flood car ever going out of a dealership, at least in Ontario, based on our laws, you'd always know that the car has been in a flood, whether it's a brand new car or not. That's something that would always get disclosed.
Yeah. MA says dealers are contacting previous sales and offering more than people paid for it.
That's typically true? That can be true in some instances. Like I said, if you're talking about maybe a car that's much harder to get nowadays, you could see yourself getting more for it. Like looking at some Range Rover Defenders from maybe last year, earlier this year, you could see those sell for slightly more than what people were paying for them. You're even seeing brand new cars getting sold for more than what they're worth is outside of the country. Specifically with Land Rovers, very specific models are very popular in like the States and China and all over the place. So they get exported quite constantly.
Yeah. And Butto TV online says, National Strike Brothers deny the service in any Ottawa businesses to the Gestapo cops, boycott the official media. I think he's referring to this call for a trucker strike, which might even start tomorrow. Is there concern, that might lead to more disruption at the factories and further exacerbate the supply chain issues and ultimately compound the inventory shortage at the dealership level?
Nothing that I've heard of. Like, it's nothing that we've really talked about. But it's not something that I get too much into at work, because I'm just only really looking at buying cars. I'm just out there looking for stuff. Yeah,
and it's a fairly new thing. We won't even know until tomorrow if that even takes hold or it has any impact, right? So no way for us to really know at this time. Big D says, my friend sold his truck he bought last year a month ago for more money than he paid. So again, yeah, like that's actually happening. I don't think, have you ever even heard of that happening in the past? That's all new to me.
It depends. Like if you're talking about something that was like a very rare trim of a car where they maybe only produced a small amount of them. Like when the Civic Type R came out, there was a lot of those cars would be selling for more than new, but it wasn't under the same pretenses of a dealership just calling somebody and trying to get that.
And Jaybird says, how can you buy a car when you cannot drive them for a test drive? You can take, like, the COVID restrictions are not such that they're restricting test drives, are they? You can take cars for test drives.
You can test drive anything you want. It may be something about dealership policy. It may depend on what vehicle you're trying to drive at that time. An average person, they're not going to let just hop behind the wheel of maybe like $100,000 car or something that's got a lot of horsepower. And then some dealerships, again, depending on the car, will have a make sure you're approved before we let you hop behind the wheel type of setup, depending on the car or the person, a lot of different things.
Where was I? I wanted to ask you. Oh, Johnny P. Good. Johnny P. Good. You have to be nuts to purchase a new car now. The problem is if you need it repaired, good luck finding parts. If that's an issue?
Depending.
It can be, I suppose, right?
It depends on what you're talking about. Like if you're talking about servicing directly at the dealership, yes, you will see that as more of a harder thing to get. Um, a lot of people will do that in the newer years of a car. But if you're talking about, buying like something that's maybe a year or two old and you're willing to take it to a mechanic shop that's not, the OEM dealer, aftermarket parts are still quite readily available for most things. If you look at something like a Honda Civic, the rotor on that car fits a lot of other cars. So there's a large amount of them. More niche and specific parts will be a little bit harder to get right now. But overall, if you're okay with not going direct OEM, you're usually pretty good with some sort of aftermarket option. So you won't have to wait for those parts to come in at the same amount of time.
Now, as you know, we're involved with the Ottawa Gatineau International Auto Show, and there is now a $500 car cash coupon, which is posted as part of the virtual auto show at ottawaautoshow.com. And that's like an offer that has been made through the auto show annually.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of an unusual situation right now, right? Because an offer like that, you don't see that much anywhere, because is anybody even out there offering any incentives or promotions to try and bring customers in? Do they even need to?
There always will be. Like, I mean, if you're ever financing or leasing a car, that's essentially a promotion right there, because of the fact that you're getting a lower interest rate than you typically would if you were to have just gone to a bank to try and get it. So by using the finance companies there immediately, you're already getting, you're getting a better deal in that way, because they'll change over time. Some car, like if you look at like Honda, they'll have 0.99 come up quite often. Particularly during the summer, you'll have like things like Kia offers 0% financing over a certain amount of time. So you'll get that type of incentive. Loyalty stuff you'll still typically get from dealers if you've been there for a long time and you're able to work out some sort of deal on a new unit. But you're not seeing too much stuff in the way of just random discounts for absolutely anybody who walks in the door, just because there's no stocking issues. And that's typically what would cause them to be like, okay, we need to sell this many more Jaguar XJs, so we need to have, $500 off each model now. But so you're not typically seeing that as much, no.
And it seems to me like the situation where dealers at the dealer level might actually be getting worse instead of better right now, just because of the way the dynamics of the market are playing out over the past couple of years. So much so that I'm hearing that there are dealerships out there that are actually laying people off in some markets and some particular brands, and not every dealership, but it looks like there might be actually some sales jobs and things like that are being lost just because this has dragged on for so long. Is there much concern out there within, as you're talking to other car dealers and salespeople from other dealerships in your area?
Yeah, obviously there's been lots of people who have gotten laid off. There's been lots of people who've lost their jobs just because of the fact of the matter is there's only so many cars to sell and you only need so many people to sell that many cars. So you'll see a lot of people have lost their jobs and moved on to different things. Luckily with the automotive industry, there's so many other wide array of jobs that you can kind of hop into that, isn't affected quite as much. So you can still end up working in a dealership, but maybe not in that sales platform or something along the lines of that. But with the way that all this COVID stuff has happened, a lot of people have changed jobs. So it's hard to kind of tell how much of it is just people changing jobs and how much of it is people losing their jobs because of the fact that the stock is down. Because in reality, to keep a salesperson around your dealership doesn't really cost you an absurd amount of money. If they're making money for you, they're making money for you. If not, they're not.
Right, sure. And I guess in the automotive industry and the dealership level, there's pretty high turnover, generally speaking, in sales jobs at dealerships, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about on the used side? Is it a good time to buy or sell, or does it even matter? Because is everything just relative?
Everything's up. Your car is worth more, but you're going to pay more for another car. The best thing you can do in reality right now is sell the car you have currently and downgrade to something a little bit cheaper. And then when inevitably the market will kind of, balance itself out a bit more, cars should go down in value a little bit. You can kind of avoid that initial hit and just eventually get into something a bit newer if you at that time feel you need to. That's probably the smartest financial thing you can do right now. A lot of people have their vehicle and it's become more of a financial asset rather than a piece of travel. Again, like especially if you're looking at something like a Lexus that's a year or two old or about to come off a lease, you're better off just getting rid of it and then finding, you know, a 1998 Honda Civic that's not $5,000 and driving that.
Right. But even at the low end of the market with some of the older stuff, that stuff's increased in value a lot too. So like if you're even looking at a, you know, like a winter beater that might have been $1,500, $2,000 before, now it's probably selling for $3,000 to $4,000, right?
Yeah, again, that's all relative depending on the condition of the car and everything. When you're talking about stuff like that, you're really getting down to more condition-based things, just because the overall fact is that like a 2018 vehicle is going to be fairly in line with every other one that's out there on the market in kilometers wise. But on older cars, you can have a 2001 that has 90K on it, but it'll be absolutely rusted out. And you could have another one with 350K on it that has no rust on it. But you know, just it's all relative in the way of the condition of the vehicle.
So the industry analysts are saying that this chip shortage is likely to continue to be a problem at least until the end of this year. So if that is the case, is this sustainable for dealerships into a third year? Because if we're talking about, say, a Honda dealership where they had been doing like 20,000 units and now they're down to like 1,500 or 2,000 because that's all the inventory they can get. How much, like, at some point, some of these dealerships would end up closing if this issue isn't resolved.
More than likely, yes. Like I feel in the next little bit, you'll see a lot of dealerships change hands. You'll see a lot more dealerships get picked up by larger auto groups and just kind of held on to until the market kind of changes back over. The only way to really survive at this point is if you kind of really stack up on your used and get as much as possible and sell as much as possible and try and make as much as possible off every single used aspect. Whether it be through financing or warranties or anything in any way, shape, or form. Because if you can't sell new cars, you have to sell some sort of cars, so might as well be used ones.
Right. So these new car dealerships are turning into used car lots largely in some cases, right? I mean, I've driven by some GM dealerships and I've seen like nothing.
Yeah.
Just about nothing on the lots. It's like empty. It just blows my mind. I don't know how they're getting by. I guess what are they trying to make it on the service side too, I guess, right?
Yeah, you'll still be making money off the service side of things. That's where when you're looking at volume dealerships, you'll see most of the money actually comes out of that. You know, things like Hondas, typically you're not making a huge amount of profit on them. So when you're talking about what makes the money in that dealership, it's a lot of oil changes. It's a lot of brake jobs. So they'll still be seeing that kind of a money coming in, if not maybe a bit more, as more customers come through because they all feel panicked that now because the news says they need a new car right now because everybody else does too. So they'll see more servicing coming through. And then of course you'll see self-generated income in the service department from the sales department by bringing more used vehicles and getting more work done on them, and then, you know, getting those ready for the lot for customers to sell as well.
Is there anything different happening on the financing side because of this? Are the dealerships taking a different approach to it, or do you have any recommendations for consumers on what they should be doing with financing? Or does it even make a difference when something like this is going on?
Not particularly. Interest rates are kind of where they're at. Same thing with, leasing. Everything's kind of where it's at when it comes down to things. You're going to get what you're going to get in reality. The only thing to really watch out for is if there's any changes to what you can and can't do with your car during or after a lease, whether you can sell it or not. I know I think it was Chevy in the States, there's a certain dealership that will keep they'll keep $100 lien on your vehicle so you can never sell it unless you sell it to them. And then at that point, that's the only way you can get rid of that vehicle is if you sell it back to the dealership. There's certain dealerships that have first right on the vehicle by their contracts and things like that. So try and find yourself a dealership that won't do that, because if you're looking at selling within the next year or so, where you might still have this type of inflation and demand for vehicles going on, you want to have the option to be able to sell your vehicle, not directly back to the dealership, but see who's going to give you the highest bid on your vehicle and give you more cash. Because if a dealership knows they're the only ones who can buy it, they're not going to give you the most amount of money for it.
Yves Dion says he has a 1983 Olds Cutlass and he's been offered 10 times its value, but it's been a very reliable car to me, so it's not for sale. Are you aware, or do you even pay any attention to the sort of the vintage or classic, or I don't know if 83 is getting up there now, but that's not really like a true classic. But yeah, collectors are going after that older stuff now. Is that having any impact on that market at all? Do you know?
To an extent, obviously everything that people said wasn't going to be collectible is slowly becoming collectible now, like cutlasses. It's like I've heard of a lot of people who have interest in those vehicles, and when you and I talk about cars, we tend to have differing opinions on something that's going to be valuable versus not valuable. So, I think that a Honda CRX is worth $10,000, but when I talk about them with you, they're $1,500 cars still. Yeah.
Johnny P. Good says GM and Ford are aware of price gouging in the States, and he wonders if that's going on anywhere in these markets in Canada. It says it's terrible what they're charging above sticker. Is that a big issue with some dealers gouging?
Depending on where you're going, some places are going to have premiums, like I was kind of mentioning before. Like with Jaguar Land Rover products, like a Range Rover Defender has a premium on it that you have to pay now on top of the regular price of the vehicle. Other places may have higher pricing on certain cars, but that all depends on how rare it is. I know with the Honda dealership here, they had a rare Phoenix yellow, one of 100 and some odd Civic Type R's that came in, and that ended up getting a bit of a price hike on the window sticker. But of course, we're talking about a very rare vehicle there. So around here, not as much of that is happening on just your standard cars.
Yeah. I guess too, you have to, the dealers have to think about long-term reputation, right? So they don't, you have to be careful about charging too much over sticker on some stuff, because it might damage their relationship, their reputation, I guess, right?
Yeah, certain dealerships have kind of that's out the window these days. Excuse me. It's less about the repeat customer and it's more about the next customer coming in.
RWDPLZ1 says local Subaru dealers have a minimum $3,000 over sticker plus a bunch of worthless add-ons. I don't know. I haven't been following much with Subaru lately, so any thoughts on that?
I can see that. The Subarus, they don't have a huge amount of stock, depending on what dealership you go to. If he's talking about there being $3,000 worth of extra add-ons, he could have been looking at like a showroom model. It may be one of their ways to kind of get a little bit of extra money for a car that's sitting there's not a lot of stock on, by just throwing a bunch of dealer added accessories onto it to kind of jack the price up. Mm-hmm. Because we know that there's usually quite a bit of markup on those, side skirts that cost them probably like $100 or something. That'll be like a $1,500 item in the, from the parts department. So it's one way to kind of see these things pop up and be a little bit more expensive than they were before, per se.
And Big D says, what about the footage of unsold cars? Thousands of them. Was that fake news? I'm not exactly sure what he's referring to. I have seen shots of fields, holding areas with lots of cars in them. You see that anyway, at outside factories. Is there, do you think, any exaggeration going on out there through the media, misinformation or exaggeration? Or can you really tell? I mean, you're at the ground level, so you're seeing it, right? This shortage is real, right?
There's obviously lots of cars that are sitting because of the chips and whatnot. I don't think they're really over exaggerating that. Obviously, they're going to show you the dealerships that have the least amount of cars. They're going to show you the yards that are the fullest with cars. It's all relative, though. Everybody's still getting their cars. That's just you're waiting a little bit longer now than you would have before. Before, where you'd be able to kind of show up, they had them sitting there. You could pick whatever color you wanted and whatever trim, and they just had it on the lot, and you could take it home a couple days later. Now you're looking at, okay, because everybody else ahead of you already ordered you theirs, next is coming in, and then there you go.
GGIS says all original parts, USA made car, less than 26 years, is a classic. RWD PLZ1, back to the Subaru thing again, saying they actually call the $3,000 a market adjustment. The add-ons are things like door edge guards, paint protection, fabric protection, VIN etching, etc.
It's just a premium on top of the price of the vehicle that they're adding. And so that $3,000 is them just gouging. You could go to another Subaru dealership and talk to them about a similar car, possibly ordering it in, and you'll get away with not actually having to pay that markup independent, unless it's a Subaru-wide thing where the actual brand has stated that they're going to have a market adjustment on these vehicles.
Other brands that have had slow sales with, they must be benefiting from this as, probably more than anyone, because I know, like, if you look at Alfa Romeo, for instance, I think that, for the past couple of, you could probably go in there and get some older inventory. They've been probably moving some inventory that they were having trouble moving before.
Possibly. Everything's up right now. Everybody's selling more cars than they were before. They're having a harder time getting rid of, maybe some, like right now, because it's not springtime, like sport stuff, but you're seeing more of the SUVs going. People are being a lot more diverse in what type of cars they're looking at. Even dealerships are being a lot more diverse in what type of cars they're putting on the lot. That's why you're seeing, some, smaller dealerships kind of having some more higher end vehicles, like some Land Rovers, or even into some, higher end sports cars that they typically wouldn't carry. Just lots of that.
And RWD PLZ1 says supposedly it's not company wide, but the 6 dealers in the Metro Detroit area are all doing it. And she says it seems to be the worst. It seems to be in LaFontaine.
Yeah, so if they're all part of the same group, from what it sounds like, it may sound like that to me, or they may all just be talkative so that they can make it seem like it's fairly normal. I'd look onto Subaru directly and see if they're even allowing that type of thing, because if it's something that Subaru is against, you could bring that up to the dealership and see if it could get rid of something, if it's something you're looking to purchase immediately. If not, I'd say that maybe make a road trip to go pick up your car somewhere else, so you don't need to pay $3,000. I mean, $3,000 a vacation somewhere. So, I mean, you might as well spend that money having some fun and then getting a car at the same time. Right.
Well, I guess the U.S. market and the Canadian market are a little bit different. Pricing's different. Inventory levels are different. It's, the value of the Canadian dollar versus U.S. is different. But some of the dynamics are still the same, because the chip shortage is present around the world, really, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, before we kind of wrap things up here tonight, what's your any final thoughts for consumers out there? Because that's mostly who's watching, not just dealers here. But what's your advice to consumers? I guess, first of all, people who are on the buying side, and then we can talk about people who are selling.
If you're buying a car, just look out to make sure that if you can avoid paying any extra fees or market adjustments or premiums, it's worth the drive. Take the few hours it might take to go somewhere outside of your city to get rid of that. It's worth the wait. Just get exactly what you want. Don't just fall for the pressure of buying something right now today, something you can take home tomorrow, because you may just end up looking to sell it within a month or two because you just like the fact that it's white or it wasn't the exact trim package you want. Just take your time and get exactly what you want. You're going to be paying a lot more for it than you usually would anyway, so you might as well get into it. If you're looking to sell your car, if it's within a couple of years old, sell it, downgrade to something a little bit cheaper, drive that for the next 2 to 3 years, and just see yourself make a little bit of money off of it. When you first initially made that investment was probably going to be something that was going to cost you money. So just get rid of it and make the money now. Sell it off to a market where someone's going to buy it for a higher price right now. Excuse me. And then past that, just be safe about it. It's always best to sell to a dealer. They're always going to give you real money. You're not going to get scammed out of anything. They're going to take care of you. They're going to make sure that everything gets taken care of, especially when you're talking about selling something like a new car that may have a lien on it or a lease. You want to make sure that all the T's and the I's are dotted on those so that you don't get screwed in the end and have, a lien under your name with a car that's all chopped apart and shipped somewhere else.
And just one last question. Is it in this market, the way the market is right now, is it better to buy or lease, or does it make a difference? Has it changed at all?
If you can lease, you're in a better shape because you can get out of it pretty much no matter what right now. You can really lease a car and then sell it off at any time and, break even or just be in it for the price of gas and oil and your insurance a lot of the time and get out of it without any hassle. As a dealership, will just be happy to take it in as a used unit and sell it off to somebody. Obviously, if you get into a finance, you're going to more than likely, right off the barrel, again, you'll lose money just like any other time. Now, if you buy a brand new car and roll it off the lot, you'll lose a bit of your initial income on that. So if you're looking to sell it instantly to just try and make a quick buck, it's not going to be quite like that, as the car still loses a percentage of its value once it rolls off the lot.
So when you first buy the car and you drive it off the lot, you're probably looking at about a 20 or 30% hit right off the top.
It depends on the car. Again, like I said, some are lower, some are higher. If you're looking at a base model, weird models, feel like if you were to try and like a Honda Accord in a mid spec that no one really wanted or something like that, you'll see a large initial hit on that. But if you get a CRV and a touring trim, that'll take less of a hit. But you'll more than likely still lose a bit of money on that car, saying you were to buy it today and then try and sell it like a week from now.
And when you say you can get out of that lease pretty easy, I guess that's true today. But if you get the lease now and then the market comes back, say a year
It'll be harder.
or two from now, then it might be a totally different scenario by the time you get there, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's not the best time to go brand new, but I mean, some people, that's just kind of what they do. That's what they want to do, and that's how it's going to be. So just get a new car. Just get what you want. That's really what you should do inevitably. The way the money is the way the money is, and just do what you want to do with what you can afford. And if you have the opportunity right now to sell your car to make a little bit of money, I'm sure that, it's a little bit cheaper to throw a double din in your car and listen to some music and stereo on that versus selling your car and getting some extra cash.
And just one last question, the economy in general, based on, the demand you're seeing for cars, is the economy in decent shape based on what you're seeing in the marketplace at the dealership level? Or is there stress out there?
Where I work, it's not really affected as much, obviously, because it's quite a higher end brand. You're dealing with a lot of the people who come in there have had money and have not really felt crazily affected by by what's been going on, because they just have been able to invest and kind of have their money in certain areas. When you're buying something like $100,000 car, you're not rolling up there and, spending all your money to buy that $100,000 car. You have a lot more kind of tucked away in the back. Obviously, from what I've seen with some of the used cars, more people are kind of trying to get into scenarios that quite typically don't work, with like having negative equity and things like that. But everyone's still buying, everybody's still selling, everybody's doing everything. Just the only issue is everything's kind of getting more expensive, but nobody's making any more money really. So,
right. Okay. Well, Ryan, that's very helpful. I appreciate you joining us, and I'm sure all the viewers appreciate you answering their questions tonight. We've been on here for a better part of an hour, and I think we've covered a lot of ground and given people some valuable and useful information. Strange times, though, where you can buy a car and turn around and in some cases sell it for more than you paid. So that's bizarre, but very interesting and exciting. And I don't know. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we
No, I think I'm pretty good.
Okay. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. You're watching SST Live Sunday night. I'm Rick Walker, and we really appreciate you all joining us. And thank you, Ryan, for joining us.
See you later.
And we will catch you all next week, same time, same station. Catch you on the flip side.